Andrei Chikatilo. Between 1978 and 1990, Andrei Chikatilo committed a series of horrific acts across the Soviet Union, primarily in the Rostov region. Known as the Butcher of Rostov, he confessed to 56 incidents, though he was convicted of 52. His reign of terror spanned over a decade, targeting vulnerable individuals including women and runaways along railway lines and in isolated areas. Chikatilo lured victims to secluded areas near forests or train stations, where he would carry out his calculated acts using knives as his primary weapon. The remote locations made discovery difficult and allowed him to operate undetected for years. His victims ranged from age 7 to 45, and he specifically targeted those he believed would not be immediately missed by society, including runaways and individuals in difficult circumstances. What drove this former teacher to commit such acts? Chikatilo suffered from severe intimate dysfunction, including impotence, which he linked to childhood trauma. Psychological evaluations described him as someone driven by deep-seated rage stemming from personal failures and a troubled upbringing during the Ukrainian famine. He had experienced extreme poverty and rumors of cannibalism in his family history, which shaped his disturbed psychology. He achieved satisfaction through acts of extreme harm, using weapons as substitutes for normal intimate relations. This pattern demonstrated a complete disconnect from empathy and human connection. His method involved stabbing victims multiple times, with some subjected to mutilation and evisceration. He removed body parts from victims and admitted to cannibalistic acts during his confessions. How was this prolific offender finally caught? Chikatilo was first detained in 1984, but released due to a blood type mismatch with evidence found at scenes. This was later explained by his paradoxical secretion, a rare forensic phenomenon where his blood, type A, did not match the blood group antigens found in his other bodily fluids, type AB, which led investigators to initially discard him as a suspect. This forensic anomaly allowed him to continue for 6 more years, claiming additional victims while police searched for someone else. In 1990, Chikatilo was stopped by police after being seen talking to children at a station. Though he was released, he was later arrested on November 20th after a search of his bag revealed a knife and rope, and a scratch on his face was linked to a recent struggle. During the initial interrogation, he resisted confessing, but a psychiatrist named Alexander Bukhanovsky built rapport that eventually helped elicit a full confession. He admitted to the full extent of his crimes and led investigators to previously undiscovered remains in forests and fields around Rostov. His detailed knowledge of crime scenes and victim details left no doubt about his guilt. He described his methods and motivations in disturbing detail during interrogations. The trial began on April 14, 1992, in Rostov, with Chikatilo placed in a metal cage for protection from victims' families who filled the courtroom seeking justice. He exhibited disturbing behavior during proceedings, including bizarre outbursts, singing, and exposing himself to the court. His erratic behavior led to questions about his sanity, but psychiatrists determined he was fit to stand trial. What was his final fate? On October 15, 1992, he was found guilty of 52 counts and sentenced to death. Appeals to higher Soviet courts failed to overturn the verdict. During his time awaiting execution, he made the chilling statement, "I am a mistake of nature, a mad beast," during trial testimony, one of his few moments of apparent self-awareness. Chikatilo was executed by gunshot on February 14, 1994. His reported last words were, "Don't blow my brains out. The Japanese want to buy them." A bizarre final statement referencing rumors that Japanese scientists wanted to study his brain. Confirmed victims included Lena Zakotnova, 9, Larissa Tkachenko, 17, Lyubov Biryuk, 13, Igor Gudkov, 7, and Sergei Markov, 14. among many others. The full list spans 53 confirmed victims, mostly young females and boys lured with promises of food, rides, or other assistance. But another case from the same era would reveal how someone in a position of trust could exploit it. Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman worked as a respected general practitioner in Hyde, England, earning the trust of his patients over decades of medical practice. Behind this professional facade, however, he was ending the lives of those who trusted him most. An inquiry later estimated he was responsible for approximately 250 deaths, making him one of the most prolific offenders in British history and possibly the world. Between 1975 and 1998, Shipman administered lethal doses of diamorphine to patients, primarily elderly women under his care. He falsified medical records to make victims appear terminally ill or in declining health, then signed death certificates attributing their passing to natural causes. The systematic nature of his deception allowed him to continue for over 2 decades without detection. What motivated a doctor to betray his oath so completely? Shipman's motivations remain unclear, but theories include a desire for control over life and death. Some experts believe his mother's death from lung cancer when he was 17 and the morphine pain relief she received influenced his psychology. He may have associated the administration of opioids with care and relief, creating a twisted justification for his actions. Others suggest he derived satisfaction from the power of determining who lived and died, playing God with his patients' lives. He selected victims who were elderly and often alone, making their deaths seem natural and less likely to raise suspicions. His position as a trusted physician gave him both access and credibility. He showed no remorse throughout his trial and imprisonment, refusing to explain his actions or provide closure to families. This lack of accountability made his crimes even more disturbing to those seeking to understand how a healer could become such a calculated killer. How did investigators finally uncover his crimes? Suspicion arose in 1998 after the death of Kathleen Grundy, an 81-year-old former mayoress. Unlike his other victims, Grundy was wealthy and prominent in the community. Her will had been crudely forged to benefit Shipman, leaving him £386,000 and cutting out her daughter entirely. Her daughter, Angela Woodruff, worked as a solicitor and immediately recognized the irregularities in the will. The typewriter used was traced to Shipman's office, and the witnesses were his staff. She alerted police to investigate further, triggering a comprehensive review of Shipman's practice. Investigations revealed abnormally high death rates among Shipman's patients compared to other practices in the area. Statistical analysis showed 15 times more deaths than expected. Authorities discovered Shipman had stockpiled diamorphine by writing fraudulent prescriptions in the names of both living and deceased patients, often claiming the medication was for palliative care. He was arrested on September 7, 1998, and exhumations of former patients confirmed they had died from morphine overdoses rather than the natural causes listed on their death certificates. Tissue samples showed lethal concentrations of the substance. The trial began on October 5, 1999, focusing on 15 representative cases from what was believed to be a much larger number. Prosecutors presented evidence of forged medical records, suspicious death patterns, and the stockpiled substances. Detective Chief Inspector Mike Williams noted during investigation, "He likes control, and the ultimate control is over life and death." What sentence did this trusted doctor receive? On January 31, 2000, Shipman was convicted of 15 counts and 1 forgery charge. He received a whole life order, meaning he would never be eligible for parole. The judge emphasized the profound betrayal of trust and the vulnerability of his victims, who had relied on him for care and healing. At sentencing, Kathy Mills, a victim's relative, stated, "I forgive him. You can't hold me anymore. demonstrating the emotional toll on families who had lost loved ones to someone they trusted. Shipman took his own life at Wakefield Prison on January 13, 2004, the day before his 58th birthday. His death meant he never confessed to his crimes or provided a motive for his actions. The confirmed victims were primarily elderly women like Kathleen Grundy, Winifred Meller, 73, and Joan Melia, 73. The Shipman inquiry identified 171 women and 44 men among the probable 215 victims, with ages ranging from 41 to 93. Many were patients he visited at their homes, where he administered fatal injections. While Shipman operated in medical settings, another case would expose horrors hidden in plain sight. Marc Dutroux. In Belgium during 1995 and 1996, Marc Dutroux abducted and imprisoned 6 young individuals, creating a nightmare that shocked the nation and exposed systematic failures in law enforcement. His crimes revealed not just individual depravity, but institutional incompetence that may have cost lives and allowed him to operate while already under suspicion. Dutroux constructed a hidden cellar in his home in Charleroi, where he held his captives in horrific conditions. The concealed dungeon, accessed through a hidden door behind shelves, was discovered only after his arrest, revealing the calculated planning behind his operation. He had modified his property specifically to enable his crimes while maintaining an outward appearance of normalcy to neighbors. What drove this repeat offender to commit such calculated acts? Dutroux had previous convictions for similar offenses dating back to 1989, when he had been sentenced to 13 years but served only 3 before being released early from prison despite clear danger signs. Psychiatrists had warned against his release, but the parole board granted it anyway. His escalation demonstrated the failure of the justice system to properly assess and manage dangerous offenders. He was motivated by gratification and profit, allegedly selling recordings of assaults to others with similar interests. He built a network that included his wife Michelle Martin, Michel Lelièvre, who helped with abductions, and Michel Nehoul, who allegedly had connections to the operation. Dutroux claimed involvement in a larger network of powerful individuals, though authorities focused their prosecution on his direct actions rather than investigating broader connections. This decision remains controversial in Belgium, with many believing higher-level involvement was ignored or covered up for political reasons. How were his crimes finally discovered? On August 13, 1996, a witness identified Dutroux's van in connection with the disappearance of 14-year-old Laetitia Delhez just hours after her abduction. The witness had noted the license plate, providing police with a crucial lead. Police obtained a search warrant and discovered the hidden cellar, where they found both Laetitia and 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne alive but severely traumatized. Sabine had been held captive for 80 days, kept chained in the cellar with minimal food and no natural light. Dutroux had told her he was protecting her from a gang that wanted to harm her, a psychological manipulation that kept her compliant. Laetitia had been there for only 4 days when they were discovered. During interrogation, Dutroux confessed and led investigators to the remains of 4 other victims. Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau died of starvation and dehydration, while Dutroux was serving a 4-month prison sentence for theft. His wife, Michelle Martin, later claimed she was too afraid of the dogs guarding the cellar to feed the children. His wife, Michelle Martin, knew they were there but did not feed them or alert authorities. And Marshall, 17, and F.J. Lambrechts, 19, had been abducted in 1995 and were found buried at a house owned by Dutroux associate, Bernard Weinstein. Dutroux admitted to drugging and burying Weinstein alive as well, when he suspected the man might talk to police. The investigation revealed shocking incompetence. Police had searched Dutro's home multiple times during 1995 and 1996 while he held victims in the hidden cellar. Officers even heard children's voices during one search, but dismissed them as coming from outside. They failed to thoroughly investigate or discover the hidden door mechanism. What was the outcome of his prosecution? The trial began on March 1, 2004, years after his arrest due to various legal complications, including the suicide of investigating magistrate Jean-Marc Connerotta's successor. During proceedings, survivor Sabine Dardenne confronted him directly, asking, "Why didn't you end me?" A question that highlighted the psychological torture victims endured, wondering why they were spared. On June 17, 2004, Dutro was convicted of kidnapping, multiple assaults, and involvement in 3 deaths. He received life imprisonment without possibility of parole, Belgium's harshest sentence. His wife, Michelle Martin, was convicted as an accomplice and sentenced to 30 years for allowing Julie and Melissa to starve, though she was controversially released on parole in 2012 after serving just 16 years. Dutro maintains his claims about a larger network, stating, "I was part of a network," though Belgian officials dismissed this as an attempt to deflect full responsibility. Sometimes evil comes in pairs rather than alone. Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka appeared to be the perfect Canadian couple, attractive and successful, earning them the nickname Ken and Barbie Killers. Behind this facade, they conducted a series of assaults and ended the lives of 3 young individuals in Ontario between 1990 and 1992. Bernardo had already committed numerous assaults as the Scarborough rapist before meeting Homolka in 1987. His attacks began in 1987 in Scarborough, Toronto, where he targeted young women in a series of calculated assaults. The couple's relationship evolved into a partnership in crime that would end 3 young lives. What motivated this deadly duo? Bernardo was driven by rage and a need for control, with psychological evaluations revealing deep-seated anger and entitlement. His personal frustrations and intimate difficulties fueled increasingly violent behavior. Homolka's motivations were more complex, with some experts believing she participated to please Bernardo and maintain their relationship. The couple's first victim was Carla's own sister, 15-year-old Tammy Homolka, whom Carla offered as a gift to Paul in December 1990. They rendered her unconscious, but she died accidentally from choking. The death was initially ruled accidental, allowing the couple to continue. In June 1991, they abducted 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey, holding her captive for days while recording their assaults on videotape. They then ended her life and dismembered her body, encasing the remains in concrete blocks that were discovered in a lake. Their final victim was 15-year-old Kristen French, abducted in April 1992 from a church parking lot. Like Leslie, she was held captive, assaulted on camera, and subsequently ended. Her body was found in a ditch 2 weeks later. How did investigators connect this seemingly normal couple to such horrific crimes? DNA technology proved crucial in linking Bernardo to the Scarborough assaults. In early 1993, authorities finally matched his DNA to evidence from those earlier attacks. Meanwhile, Homolka had suffered injuries from Bernardo's increasing personal violence and sought medical attention. Homolka's lawyer contacted police and negotiated what would become one of Canada's most controversial plea deals. In exchange for testifying against Bernardo, she received a 12-year sentence for manslaughter. Bernardo was arrested on February 17, 1993. The case took a dramatic turn when videotapes hidden in the couple's home were discovered, showing both participants actively involved in the assaults. This evidence revealed that Homolka had been far more involved than her plea deal suggested, sparking public outrage over the leniency of her sentence. What sentences did the couple receive? Bernardo's trial concluded in September 1995 with convictions on multiple counts, including first-degree ending of life. He received life imprisonment with no parole eligibility for 25 years. In 2021, his parole was denied, and he remains incarcerated. Homolka completed her 12-year sentence and was released in 2005, despite public opposition. She has since changed her name and reportedly lives in Quebec with a new family. Her release remains controversial, with many believing she received inadequate punishment given her level of participation shown in the videotapes. The case exposed flaws in the Canadian justice system, particularly regarding plea bargains made before all evidence is known. It also highlighted how dangerous partnerships can enable escalating criminal behavior, with each partner emboldening the other. Across the ocean, another predator was targeting the vulnerable. Robert Pickton. Robert Pickton owned a pig farm in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, where he lured vulnerable women throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. He was convicted of 6 counts, but confessed to 49 total, making him Canada's most prolific known offender of this nature. His farm became the site of one of the largest forensic investigations in Canadian history. Pickton specifically targeted women from Vancouver's downtown east side, an impoverished area where many struggled with various issues, including substance dependencies and homelessness. He knew these victims were less likely to be immediately missed, and that investigations into their disappearances would be slow or non-existent. This calculated targeting demonstrated his awareness of societal indifference toward marginalized individuals. What enabled Pickton to operate for so long? The isolated pig farm provided the perfect location for his crimes, situated on 17 acres in a semi-rural area. The remote property, with its numerous buildings, industrial meat processing equipment, and isolated location, made concealing evidence relatively easy. He allegedly used the farm's facilities to dispose of remains, making victim identification extremely difficult or impossible in many cases. Police incompetence and societal prejudice played major roles in allowing Pickton to continue for years. Between 1983 and 2001, dozens of women from the downtown east side went missing, but authorities dismissed reports as low-priority cases. Police characterized the women as transient and suggested they had simply moved away or died from lifestyle-related causes. How was he finally caught? In February 2002, police executed a search warrant on Pickton's farm for illegal firearms after receiving tips about weapons on the property. During the search, they discovered personal items belonging to missing women, including identification cards, clothing, and jewelry. They also found biological evidence that would link Pickton to the victims. Excavation of the property uncovered remains and DNA evidence linking Pickton to dozens of missing women. The forensic investigation took years, with teams methodically searching the entire 17-acre farm property using archaeological techniques. Soil was sifted, buildings were dismantled, and even the farm's pigs were examined for human DNA. During a jailhouse conversation with an undercover officer posing as a cellmate, Pickton confessed that he had ended 49 lives and had been aiming for 50 to make it an even number. This chilling statement revealed the calculating nature of his crimes and his complete lack of empathy for his victims, whom he viewed merely as numbers in a goal. What was the outcome of his trial? The trial began in January 2006, with prosecutors initially pursuing charges in connection with 26 victims where sufficient DNA evidence existed. Due to the complexity of the case and the volume of evidence, it was split into groups. The first trial focused on 6 victims where evidence was strongest. In December 2007, Pickton was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree charges, with the jury finding sufficient evidence for these cases. The second-degree verdict meant the jury believed he had ended these lives intentionally, but without premeditation. A controversial decision that many felt didn't reflect the calculated nature of his crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no parole eligibility for 25 years, the maximum sentence under Canadian law for second-degree convictions. Charges related to 20 other victims were stayed, meaning they could theoretically be pursued later but likely never will be, leaving many families without formal acknowledgement of their losses. As of 2026, it is a matter of record that Robert Pickton died on May 31, 2024, following a targeted assault by a fellow inmate at the Port Cartier institution in Quebec. His death closed a dark chapter, but left many families without full answers about their loved ones, as he never provided complete information about all his victims. Victims included Serena Abotsway, 29, Mona Wilson, 26, Andrea Josberry, 22, Brenda Wolfe, 32, Georgina Papin, 34, and Marnie Frey, 24, among the 6 he was convicted of ending. The other 43 women he confessed to remain officially unaccounted for in the legal system. Across the Atlantic, another couple was hiding terrible secrets. Fred and Rosemary West. Fred and Rosemary West conducted their crimes at their home at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, England, throughout the 1970s, 1980s, and into the 1990s. The seemingly ordinary house concealed one of Britain's most disturbing cases, with at least 12 victims discovered on the property. Fred West had a history of concerning behavior before meeting Rose, including previous incidents with young women. When he met 15-year-old Rose in 1969, they formed a partnership that would enable escalating criminal behavior. Their relationship evolved into a deadly collaboration. What motivated this deadly couple? Both Wests derived satisfaction from control and domination, with Rose participating actively rather than being coerced. They shared twisted interests and fed off each other's darkest impulses. Fred's charisma and Rose's willingness to participate created a dangerous dynamic. Their victims included their own daughter, lodgers, and young women they encountered through various means. They would lure victims to their home with offers of lodging or work. The basement and garden of 25 Cromwell Street became burial sites. How were their decades of crimes finally discovered? In August 1992, police received reports of inappropriate behavior at the West household, leading to investigations. Though this case initially fell apart, it prompted further scrutiny of the family. Questions about a missing daughter led authorities to dig deeper into the West's past. In February 1994, police obtained a warrant to search 25 Cromwell Street for the remains of Fred's daughter Heather, who had allegedly moved away years earlier. During excavation of the garden, investigators discovered human remains. This discovery led to a complete excavation of the property. As the excavation continued, more remains were found in the basement and under various parts of the property. Eventually, 12 bodies were discovered at Cromwell Street, with additional victims found at previous West residences. The discoveries shocked Britain and drew international attention. What happened to the Wests? Fred West was charged with 12 counts as the investigation uncovered the full extent of the crimes. However, on January 1, 1995, he took his own life in prison while awaiting trial, denying victims' families the opportunity for courtroom justice and full answers about all his crimes. Rosemary West's trial proceeded in October 1995. Despite her claims of ignorance and attempts to blame everything on Fred, evidence showed her active participation. Witness testimony from survivors who escaped the Wests painted a picture of Rose as an enthusiastic participant rather than a coerced accomplice. On November 22, 1995, Rose was convicted of 10 counts and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge recommending she never be released. She continues to maintain her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Multiple parole applications have been denied. Victims included lodger Linda Goff, the West's own daughter Heather West, and others like Carol Ann Cooper and Lucy Partington. 25 Cromwell Street was demolished in 1996, with the site now a walkway, removing the physical reminder of the horrors that occurred there. The case raised questions about how such crimes could continue undetected in a residential neighborhood for decades, with neighbors largely unaware of the horrors occurring next door. Australia faced its own monsters during this era. Ivan Milat. Ivan Milat terrorized travelers along Australia's Hume Highway during the early 1990s, targeting backpackers who were hitchhiking through New South Wales. He was convicted of 7 offenses, though suspected in several others, earning him the moniker Backpacker Slayer. Between 1989 and 1993, Milat picked up young travelers who were hitchhiking along the busy highway connecting Sydney and Melbourne. He would offer rides and friendly conversation before taking them to Belanglo State Forest, where he would carry out brutal attacks. His charming demeanor made him seem like a helpful local to unsuspecting victims. What drove Milat to target innocent travelers? Psychological evaluations suggested Milat was motivated by power and control, deriving satisfaction from dominating and tormenting his victims. He came from a troubled family with a history of criminal activity, and several of his brothers also had concerning records. The isolated forest locations he chose demonstrated planning and knowledge of the terrain. Victims were subjected to prolonged ordeals before being ended, with forensic evidence suggesting they were held for some time. The remote location of Belanglo State Forest provided the perfect setting for his crimes, far from potential witnesses and difficult for victims to escape. How were these forest crimes finally solved? In September 1992, orienteers discovered the first remains in Belanglo State Forest. Over the following year, more bodies were found in the same area, all showing similar patterns of harm. Police realized they were dealing with a serial offender targeting backpackers. A major investigation, Task Force Air, was established to solve the cases. Detectives compiled lists of vehicles seen in the area and interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses. The breakthrough came when Paul Onions, a British backpacker who had escaped an attempted abduction in 1990, identified Ivan Milat from a police photo lineup in 1994, providing the testimony needed to execute the raid on Milat's home. In May 1994, police raided Milat's home in Eagle Vale, discovering items belonging to several victims, including camping equipment and personal effects. They also found weapons and ammunition matching forensic evidence from the crime scenes. Milat was arrested and charged with 7 counts. What was the outcome of his trial? The trial began in March 1996 with extensive forensic evidence and witness testimony. Prosecutors presented ballistics evidence, personal items linking Milat to victims, and testimony from the backpacker who escaped. The case drew massive media attention both in Australia and internationally. On July 27, 1996, Milat was convicted on all 7 counts and received 7 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. The judge described the crimes as among the worst in Australian history, emphasizing the vulnerable nature of the victims who were far from home and family. Milat remained defiant throughout his imprisonment, refusing to discuss his crimes or provide information about potential other victims. He attempted a prison escape in 1997, and in 2001, he went on a hunger strike demanding more comfortable prison conditions. Milat was diagnosed with cancer in 2019 and died in prison on October 27, 2019, never having provided full answers about the extent of his crimes. Authorities suspect he may have been involved in other unsolved missing persons cases along the Hume Highway. Victims included Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters from Britain, Simone Schmudl from Germany, and Gabor Neugebauer, Anya Habshed, and Deborah Everest and James Gibson from Australia and Britain. Their families continue to remember them as adventurous young people whose lives were cut tragically short. The case led to warnings for travelers about hitchhiking dangers and changes in how police investigate missing backpackers. Sometimes crimes are carried out by groups rather than individuals. Snowtown murders. The Snowtown murders unfolded in South Australia between 1992 and 1999, involving a group led by John Bunting who ended the lives of 11 individuals. The case became Australia's most infamous serial offending case, characterized by the discovery of remains in barrels in a former bank vault in Snowtown. John Bunting emerged as the leader of a group that included Robert Wagner, James Vlasakis, and Mark Hayden. Bunting was a charismatic figure who convinced others to participate in targeting individuals he deemed undesirable. His manipulative personality allowed him to control and direct the group's activities. What motivated this group to commit such acts? Bunting's stated motivation was eliminating individuals he considered harmful to society. But financial gain through accessing victims' bank accounts was also a major factor. The group would torture victims to obtain bank PIN numbers and continue accessing benefits after their deaths. This combination of ideological hatred and financial greed drove their campaign. Victims were lured to properties in Adelaide's northern suburbs, where they were subjected to prolonged torture before being ended. The group used a property in Salisbury North as their primary location for these acts. They then stored remains in acid-filled barrels to prevent identification. How were these calculated crimes finally discovered? The breakthrough came on May 20th, 1999, when police received information about suspicious activity and investigated a former bank vault in Snowtown. Inside, they discovered 8 bodies stored in barrels containing acid. The horrific discovery shocked Australia and triggered a major investigation. As police investigated further, they uncovered the extent of the group's activities. James Vlasakis, the youngest member, became a key witness and confessed to his involvement. His testimony revealed the group dynamics and how Bunting had manipulated others into participating. Additional remains were found at other locations, bringing the total victim count to 11. The investigation revealed a pattern of financial exploitation, with the group accessing victims' accounts for months or years after their deaths. What sentences did the perpetrators receive? John Bunting's trial concluded in 2003 with convictions on 11 counts. He was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole, making him ineligible for release for 660 years. The judge described him as a sadistic manipulator who had orchestrated the entire operation. Robert Wagner was convicted of 10 counts and also received life imprisonment with no parole eligibility. He had been Bunting's closest associate and actively participated in the planning and execution of the crimes. James Vlasakis, who testified against the others, received 4 life sentences with a minimum non-parole period of 26 years for his cooperation. He admitted to involvement in 4 cases and provided crucial testimony about the group's operations. Mark Hayden was convicted of lesser charges for providing assistance and received 25 years with an 18-year minimum. His role was primarily in disposing of remains and helping conceal the crimes. Victims included Elizabeth Hayden, Troy Yude, Gary O'Dwyer, and others from Adelaide's northern suburbs. Many were vulnerable individuals with mental health issues or social isolation, making them easier targets for the group. The case led to increased scrutiny of social welfare systems and how benefits could be exploited, with reforms implemented to prevent similar fraud in the future. America had its own notorious offender operating during this era. Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer, committed his crimes primarily in Washington state during the 1980s and 1990s, though most were not discovered until the late 1990s and early 2000s. He confessed to 71 offenses, though he was convicted of 49, making him one of America's most prolific known offenders of this nature. His killing spree spanned nearly 2 decades before technology finally identified him. Ridgway specifically targeted vulnerable women, particularly those working in certain industries around the Seattle-Tacoma area. He picked up victims along the Pacific Highway South, also known as the SeaTac Strip, an area known for such activity. His victims often struggled with various issues, including substance dependencies, making them less likely to be immediately missed by families or authorities. What drove this seemingly ordinary man to such extremes? Ridgway lived a seemingly normal life, working at the Kenworth truck factory for 32 years and appearing unremarkable to neighbors and coworkers. He had been married 3 times and maintained an outward appearance of normalcy, attending church regularly and painting his truck to look like a forestry service vehicle to appear trustworthy. Psychological evaluations later revealed deep-seated issues with women stemming from his relationship with his domineering mother. He exhibited a pattern of returning to disposal sites to revisit remains, sometimes engaging in necrophilic acts. This demonstrated a continued connection to his crimes and a complete disconnect from viewing victims as human beings. The Green River area in King County became associated with multiple discoveries in 1982 and 1983, though he used various disposal locations throughout the region, including wooded areas near highways. How did investigators finally identify the Green River killer? The investigation spanned nearly 2 decades, making it one of the longest serial offender investigations in U.S. history. Ridgway had actually been interviewed multiple times during the investigation, including in 1983, when a boyfriend of one victim identified him. He even passed a polygraph test in 1984, which investigators later realized he had beaten through his extreme emotional detachment. The breakthrough came with advances in DNA technology in the late 1990s and early 2000s. In 2001, preserved evidence from 4 victims killed in 1982 and 1983 was reanalyzed using improved DNA techniques, including PCR, polymerase chain reaction, that could work with degraded samples. The analysis matched Ridgway's DNA, which was already in the system from a 1987 arrest for solicitation. He was arrested on November 30, 2001, at his workplace at the Kenworth truck factory. His co-workers were shocked, having worked alongside him for decades without suspecting anything. During interrogation, Ridgway eventually confessed to dozens of cases and helped investigators locate remains that had never been found. He provided details about his methods, explaining he would pick up women, take them to remote locations, strangle them, and then dump their bodies in clusters. He would often weigh bodies down in the Green River or leave them in wooded areas where they wouldn't be discovered for months or years. His cooperation was part of a plea agreement to avoid capital punishment. What sentence did this prolific offender receive? Ridgway's sentencing occurred in December 2003 after he pleaded guilty to 48 counts as part of the agreement with prosecutors. King County prosecuting attorney Norm Maleng accepted the deal because it provided closure for families, brought resolution to dozens of cold cases, and helped locate remains of victims who had never been found. He received 48 life sentences without possibility of parole, plus 10 years for tampering with evidence, all to be served consecutively. Judge Richard Jones delivered a harsh rebuke during sentencing, telling Ridgway he had made this planet a worse place. In 2011, Ridgway pleaded guilty to one additional case, that of Rebecca Marrero, after DNA evidence conclusively linked him. This brought his official conviction total to 49. He continues to be consulted about potential additional victims, as investigators believe he may have been involved in other unsolved cases from the era. Ridgway is currently incarcerated at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, where he will remain for the rest of his life. He has shown no genuine remorse for his actions and appears to view his crimes clinically, discussing them matter-of-factly with investigators when asked for details about disposal locations. Victims included Wendy Caulfield, 16, found in the Green River in July 1982. Deborah Bonner, 23. Marcia Chapman, 31. Cynthia Hines, 17. Opal Mills, 16. And dozens of other women from the Seattle-Tacoma area. Many remained unidentified for years, buried as Jane Does until DNA technology allowed for identification. Some victims' remains have still never been recovered despite Ridgway's confessions. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. America had its own notorious cases that would capture headlines throughout the decade. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos became known as America's first female serial offender when she ended the lives of 7 men in Florida between 1989 and 1990. Her case attracted massive media attention due to her gender and her claims of self-defense, sparking debates about whether she was a cold-blooded killer or a victim fighting back against those who harmed her. The sensational nature of her case captivated the nation. Wuornos worked along Florida's highways, where she encountered her victims who picked her up while she was soliciting. She would shoot them with a .22 caliber handgun, often taking their vehicles and personal belongings. The bodies were found along roadways in North and Central Florida, with all victims shot multiple times at close range, typically in the torso. What drove Wuornos to commit these acts? Wuornos had an extremely troubled background, marked by difficulties from early childhood. She was abandoned by her mother at age 4 and raised by her grandparents in Michigan. She experienced severe trauma from her grandfather, and by age 11 was trading intimate acts for cigarettes and drugs. By 13, she was working to survive on the streets after becoming pregnant and being thrown out. Her adult life was marked by homelessness, substance issues, and arrests for various offenses, including assault and weapons charges. She had a long criminal record before the incidents began. In 1986, she met Tyria Moore at a gay bar in Daytona, and they began a relationship that would last through the period of the crimes. Wuornos claimed all 7 men had assaulted or attempted to assault her, and that she had acted in self-defense. However, investigators found evidence suggesting at least some encounters were robbery-motivated rather than defensive responses to immediate threats. The pattern of taking victims' vehicles and belongings, plus the fact she continued soliciting after each incident, suggested premeditation. How was she identified and captured? The investigation gained traction when pawnshop records showed items belonging to victim Richard Mallory being sold by someone matching Wuornos's description. Police compiled a list of pawned items and traced them back to various victims. Witnesses had seen Wuornos with victims' vehicles, and a composite sketch was created. A bloody palm print found on the interior door handle of victim Peter Seam's car was the forensic evidence that matched Wuornos's records and linked her to the scene. Authorities issued a nationwide bulletin for Wuornos and Moore. Moore was located first and agreed to cooperate with police, wearing a wire during multiple phone conversations with Wuornos. In the recorded calls, Wuornos made incriminating statements while trying to convince Moore not to cooperate with authorities. She told Moore to claim she knew nothing and tried to take full responsibility. Wuornos was arrested on January 9, 1991, at the Last Resort Bar in Port Orange, Florida, where she was apprehended by undercover officers after being identified from an outstanding warrant for a firearms charge. During interrogation, she confessed to all 7 cases, initially claiming self-defense but providing details that contradicted this narrative. She described how she would proposition men, then shoot them when they became vulnerable, taking their money and vehicles. Her confessions were videotaped and would prove crucial at trial. What was the outcome of her trials? Wuornos faced multiple trials starting in January 1992. Her first trial for Richard Mallory's ending resulted in conviction despite defense arguments about self-defense and her history of trauma. The prosecution presented evidence that the shooting pattern suggested execution-style attacks rather than defensive responses. The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty, and she was sentenced to death. She pleaded guilty or no contest to 5 additional cases, receiving death sentences for each. During her trial testimony, she stated, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again too," showing defiance rather than remorse. She fired her attorneys multiple times and gave bizarre press conferences proclaiming her innocence despite the confessions. Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, at Florida State Prison. Her final words were, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie Big Mothership and all. I'll be back." Her case inspired numerous documentaries including Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer, and the film Monster starring Charlize Theron, who won an Oscar for the role. Victims included Richard Mallory, 51, a Clearwater electronics store owner found in December 1989. David Spears, 43, a construction worker found in June 1990. Charles Carskadden, 40, found in June 1990. Peter Seams, 65, a missionary whose body was never found. Troy Burris, 50, a sausage salesman found in August 1990. Dick Humphreys, 56, a retired Air Force major and police chief found in September 1990. And Walter Antonio, 60, a truck driver found in November 1990. Another drifter would use America's railways to target victims across multiple states. Angel Maturino Resendiz. Angel Maturino Resendiz, known as the Railroad Killer, committed a series of offenses across multiple states between 1986 and 1999. He was convicted of 9 cases but suspected in up to 23 total, making him one of the most mobile offenders in American history as he used the rail system to move between locations and evade capture for over a decade. Resendiz was an undocumented immigrant from Mexico who rode freight trains across the United States, attacking victims in homes near railroad tracks. His transient lifestyle made him difficult to track, as he had no fixed address and left little paper trail. He could easily cross back into Mexico between crimes, further complicating investigations and creating jurisdictional challenges. What was his pattern of targeting victims? Resendiz ambushed Christopher Meyer and Holly Dunn while they were walking along the railroad tracks near the University of Kentucky, beating Meyer to death with a rock while Dunn survived. He used whatever weapons he found at the scene, including blunt objects like sledgehammers, pickaxes, and implements found in victims' homes. This opportunistic approach meant each crime scene looked different, initially preventing investigators from connecting the cases. Victims ranged widely in age and circumstance, from young college students to elderly couples living in rural areas. The randomness of his target selection terrified communities along railroad lines across Texas, Kentucky, Illinois, Georgia, and other states. He showed no specific victim preference beyond proximity to train tracks, attacking both men and women, couples, and individuals. How did law enforcement finally identify him? The breakthrough came when survivor Holly Dunn provided a detailed description after being attacked alongside her boyfriend Christopher Meyer in August 1997 near railroad tracks in Lexington, Kentucky. Meyer was beaten to death with a rock, but Dunn survived despite severe head injuries and helped create a composite sketch that would prove crucial. Forensic evidence from multiple crime scenes was linked together through fingerprints left at various locations and DNA evidence. Investigators realized they were dealing with a single offender who was using the railway system to travel between states, striking in different jurisdictions and then disappearing on freight trains. The FBI became involved in coordinating the multi-state investigation. In 1999, Texas Ranger Drew Carter negotiated with Resendiz's sister Manuela to convince him to surrender. Carter promised Resendez that his family would receive reward money and that he would not be harmed. Resendez believed in a Mexican legal principle that would protect him if he turned himself in voluntarily rather than being captured. He surrendered at the International Bridge in El Paso on July 13, 1999, walking across with Carter to face justice. His surrender was filmed and broadcast nationwide. Upon arrival in the United States, he was immediately arrested and charged with multiple counts across various jurisdictions. What was the outcome of his prosecution? Resendez's trial in Texas focused on the case of Dr. Claudia Benton, a 39-year-old physician he had beaten to death in her home near railroad tracks in Houston in December 1998. The prosecution presented overwhelming forensic evidence, including fingerprints found at the scene and DNA evidence linking him to the attack. He was convicted in May 2000 and sentenced to death after a relatively short trial. During the proceedings, he showed no remorse and even smiled at times during testimony about his victims, disturbing courtroom observers. His defense team attempted to argue mental illness and childhood trauma, but psychiatric evaluations found him competent and aware of his actions. Resendez was executed by lethal injection on June 27, 2006, at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. He apologized to victims' families in his final statement, saying, "I want to ask if it is in your heart to forgive me. You don't have to. I know I allowed the devil to rule my life." He also thanked Carter for keeping his promise about his family's safety. Confirmed victims included Dr. Claudia Benton, 39, in Houston; Christopher Meyer, 21, in Kentucky; Norman and Karen Cernick, both 46, in Weimar, Texas; Nomi Dominguez, 26, in Houston; Josephine Convica, 73, in Fayette County, Texas; George Morber, 80, and Carolyn Frederick, 52, in Gorham, Illinois; and Leafy Mason, 87, in Hughes Springs, Texas. Survivor Holly Dunn became an advocate for victims' rights and worked to help other survivors. Not all 1990s offenders were drifters. Some operated in specific locations. Danny Rolling. Danny Rolling became known as the Gainesville Ripper after ending the lives of 5 college students in Gainesville, Florida, in August 1990. The attacks occurred over just 4 days, creating panic at the University of Florida campus and throughout the college town at the start of the fall semester. Students fled in droves, and those who remained lived in fear. Rolling broke into off-campus apartments where students lived, attacking them during night hours while they slept. The brutal nature of the crimes shocked the nation and led to widespread fear among college students nationwide. The case drew massive media attention and prompted many students to leave Gainesville temporarily, with enrollment dropping noticeably. What drove Rolling to commit these acts? Rolling had a troubled background marked by conflict with his abusive father, James Rolling, a Shreveport police officer who regularly subjected him to severe beatings and psychological torment. His father once held a gun to his head and threatened to end his life, creating deep-seated rage and trauma. He developed psychological issues early and had been in and out of prison for various offenses, including armed robbery. His escalation to these heinous acts seemed linked to his deteriorating mental state and rage toward authority figures, which he displaced onto vulnerable young women. He had recently been released from prison and was living as a drifter, camping in the woods near Gainesville when the crimes occurred. Rolling later claimed he was influenced by the horror movie The Exorcist III, which featured a character called the Gemini Killer. Rolling identified with this fictional character and allegedly tried to emulate aspects of the film. This claim was viewed skeptically by prosecutors who saw it as an attempt to shift blame away from his own choices. How was he identified and captured? Rolling was actually captured for an unrelated robbery in Ocala, Florida, in September 1990, shortly after the Gainesville incidents. While in custody for that crime, Investigators from Gainesville noticed similarities between his pattern and the college town cases, including his method of entry through sliding glass doors and items taken from victims. DNA evidence would prove crucial in linking him to the Gainesville crimes. Hair samples and biological evidence collected from the crime scenes matched Rolling's DNA profile when tested. Additionally, a campsite where Rolling had been living in the woods near Gainesville contained items belonging to the victims, including a screwdriver used to pry open windows. A fellow inmate, Bobby Lewis, testified that Rolling had confessed to him while they were both in jail on other charges, providing details about the crimes that only the perpetrator would know. Rolling had described the attacks in disturbing detail to Lewis, apparently unable to resist discussing what he had done and seeking some form of recognition. What sentence did he receive? Rolling's trial began in February 1994, and he pleaded guilty to all 5 counts to avoid having graphic evidence and crime scene photographs presented in open court that would further traumatize families. Despite the guilty plea, a penalty phase proceeded to determine whether he would receive death or life imprisonment. The jury recommended death, and Judge Stan Morris sentenced Rolling accordingly. During the penalty phase, his defense presented evidence of his abusive childhood and mental health issues, but prosecutors emphasized the calculated nature of his crimes and the terror he inflicted on an entire community. The premeditation shown in his method of operation weighed heavily against him. Rolling was executed by lethal injection on October 25, 2006, at Florida State Prison in Starka. His final statement included an apology and a song he sang for victims' families, titled Hukilau. He maintained that he had found religious redemption while on death row, though victims' families found little comfort in his words. The 5 victims included Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Tracy Pauls, and Manuel Taboada, who were students at the University of Florida, and Krista Hoyt, who was a student at Santa Fe Community College. While Rolling terrorized Florida, another offender was operating in New York City. Heriberto Seda. Heriberto Seda became known as the New York Zodiac copycat killer for his crimes in New York City between 1990 and 1993. He was responsible for 3 deaths and wounded 6 others, deliberately imitating aspects of the infamous California Zodiac killer from the 1960s and 1970s. Seda targeted victims based on their astrological signs, shooting them at random in various New York City neighborhoods. He sent taunting letters to police and newspapers using Zodiac-style symbols and cryptic messages, creating public panic and drawing comparisons to the unsolved California case. What motivated this copycat behavior? Seda was obsessed with astrology and the original Zodiac case, spending extensive time studying the California crimes and creating his own twisted version. He lived in East New York, Brooklyn, and would travel to different boroughs to carry out his attacks, making connections difficult for police initially. His letters to authorities were filled with astrological references and symbols, deliberately mimicking the original Zodiac's communications. He used a homemade device to create cipher-like messages and included details about his crimes to prove the letters were authentic. How was this copycat finally identified? The breakthrough came in an unexpected way in June 1996, 3 years after his last attack. Seda got into a dispute with his half-sister and shot her during an argument. When police responded to the scene, Seda engaged in a standoff before eventually surrendering. During fingerprint processing for the domestic incident, investigators noticed Seda's prints matched those on the Zodiac letters sent years earlier. This connection was entirely fortuitous, as the domestic case had nothing to do with the Zodiac investigation. The match was confirmed through forensic analysis. Seda's apartment was searched, revealing extensive evidence of his Zodiac crimes, including the zip gun he had used, ammunition, and materials used to create the letters. He had kept detailed records of astrology and crime scene information, essentially creating a shrine to his crimes. What sentence did he receive? Seida's trial concluded in June 1998, with convictions for 3 counts of second-degree ending of life and 6 counts of attempted ending. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including the fingerprints, physical evidence from his apartment, and ballistics matches. He was sentenced to 232 years in prison, effectively ensuring he would never be released. The judge emphasized the terror he had inflicted on New York City and his complete lack of remorse for targeting innocent people based on their birth dates. Seida is currently incarcerated in a New York State prison. His case demonstrated how copycat offenders can be influenced by unsolved historical cases and attempt to recreate their notoriety. Victims included Joseph Protze, 78, shot in March 1990, Patricia Fonti, 29, ended in June 1990, and homeless man Mario Orozco, ended in June 1992. The 6 survivors included individuals shot in various attacks between 1990 and 1993. The 1990s would also see a case that shocked California's Yosemite region. Cary Stayner. Cary Stayner worked as a handyman at Cedar Lodge near Yosemite National Park when he ended the lives of 4 women in 1999. His crimes shattered the tranquility of one of America's most beautiful natural areas and revealed a dark secret behind a seemingly quiet maintenance worker. In February 1999, Stayner entered a cabin at the lodge where tourists Carol Sund, her daughter Julie, and family friend Silvina Palazzo were staying. He held them captive before ending their lives and disposing of their bodies in remote areas. Their disappearance triggered a massive search operation. What drove Stayner to commit these acts? Stayner had grown up in the shadow of a famous family tragedy. His younger brother Stephen had been kidnapped in 1972 and held for 7 years before escaping. The media attention on Stephen's case had dominated the family's life, and Cary felt neglected and overlooked. He later revealed he had harbored violent fantasies since childhood, describing urges to harm women that he had kept hidden for decades. The isolation of his job at the lodge and access to vulnerable tourists created an opportunity he eventually acted upon. His seemingly normal exterior concealed disturbing thoughts he claimed to have experienced for 30 years. How was he identified after the initial crimes? After the disappearance of Carol, Julie, and Silvina, Stayner struck again in July 1999. He approached naturalist Joey Armstrong, 26, near her cabin in Yosemite. This time, witnesses saw his vehicle near the scene, providing investigators with a crucial lead. When FBI agents interviewed Stayner about Armstrong's disappearance, he initially denied involvement, but his nervous behavior raised suspicions. Forensic evidence from Armstrong's cabin and his vehicle linked him to the scene. Under interrogation, he confessed not only to Armstrong's death, but also to the earlier crimes involving the 3 tourists. Stayner led investigators to the bodies, which had been left in remote areas of Yosemite. He provided detailed descriptions of the crimes that demonstrated premeditation and a complete lack of empathy for his victims. What was the outcome of his trials? Stayner faced both federal and state charges. He was first tried in federal court for Armstrong's ending, as it occurred on federal parkland. In 2002, he was convicted and sentenced to death. During trial, his defense team attempted to argue mental illness, but forensic psychiatrists found him legally sane and aware of his actions. In 2004, he was also convicted in state court for the endings of Carol Sund, 42, Julie Sund, 15, and Silvina Palazzo, 16, receiving additional death sentences. During his confession, he told FBI agents, "I'm sick, I know I'm sick," but showed little genuine remorse for his victims. Stayner remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California, where appeals continue through the court system. His case highlighted the complexity of family trauma and how childhood neglect can manifest in devastating ways. The Stainer case demonstrated that offenders can come from seemingly normal backgrounds, and that family tragedy doesn't excuse criminal behavior. The 1990s also saw infamous cases that had begun earlier. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes spanned from 1978 to 1991, but he was finally captured in July 1991 when one of his intended victims escaped and led police to his Milwaukee apartment. Inside, investigators discovered remains of 17 individuals, along with evidence of necrophilia, dismemberment, and cannibalism that shocked even veteran detectives who had seen countless crime scenes. Dahmer had lured victims, primarily young men, to his apartment with promises of money for photographs or companionship. Once inside, he would drug them with sedative-laced drinks and then end their lives, keeping remains as trophies. His apartment of horrors contained preserved body parts in the refrigerator, skulls painted and kept as mementos, and evidence of his disturbing practices, including acid-filled barrels used for disposal. What created this monster? Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee to parents Lionel and Joyce, whose marriage was troubled by constant arguments and Joyce's mental health struggles. His mother suffered from depression and took numerous medications during her pregnancy with Jeffrey. At age 4, he underwent double hernia surgery that witnesses said changed his personality dramatically from a happy child to withdrawn and uncommunicative. He became increasingly isolated as a teenager, collecting roadkill and dissecting animals in a shed behind the family home, displaying early warning signs that went unaddressed by his preoccupied parents. His parents divorced when he was 18, with his mother moving away and leaving him alone in the family home for months. His alcohol use escalated, and his violent fantasies became more elaborate and detailed. Psychological evaluations revealed complex mental disorders, including necrophilia, where he sought control over completely passive partners who couldn't reject or abandon him. He explained to psychiatrists that he wanted to create compliant companions who would never leave him, revealing deep-seated abandonment issues stemming from his chaotic childhood and his parents' divorce. How was he finally captured? On July 22, 1991, Tracy Edwards escaped from Dahmer's apartment with handcuffs still attached to one wrist after being held for several hours. Edwards flagged down Milwaukee police officers Rolf Mueller and Robert Routh and led them back to the Oxford Apartments at 924 North 25th Street. When officers entered apartment 213, they immediately detected a foul odor and discovered Polaroid photographs of dismembered bodies in various stages of decay. Opening the refrigerator revealed a severed head, and further searching uncovered skulls, preserved organs in jars, and body parts throughout the apartment. Dahmer calmly admitted to everything when confronted, showing eerie detachment from the magnitude of his crimes. He told investigators, "I always knew that it was wrong," demonstrating he understood the moral and legal implications of his actions even while committing them. FBI profilers interviewed Dahmer extensively for insights into his psychology as part of their research into serial offender behavior. He explained his methods in clinical detail, describing how he experimented with different preservation techniques and how his practices escalated from keeping bodies intact to eventual dismemberment and consumption. What was his trial outcome? Dahmer's trial began in January 1992, with his attorneys attempting an insanity defense arguing he could not conform his behavior to the law. The prosecution argued he was legally sane, as evidenced by his ability to hold a job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, maintain an apartment, and carefully conceal his crimes for over a decade. The jury deliberated for 5 hours before finding him sane and guilty on 15 counts, and he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms totaling 957 years in prison. Wisconsin had abolished the death penalty in 1853, so life imprisonment was the maximum sentence available. During sentencing, He expressed remorse and said he wished for his own death as punishment. Dahmer was killed in prison on November 28, 1994, beaten to death with a metal bar by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver while on work detail at the Columbia Correctional Institution. He was 34 years old. His case continues to be studied by criminal psychologists examining the development of such extreme criminal behavior and the role of early childhood trauma. The 1990s also saw devastating attacks that weren't serial crimes, but mass casualty events. Timothy McVeigh. On April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh detonated a truck bomb outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, ending 168 lives, including 19 children in a daycare center. The attack remained America's deadliest act of domestic terror until September 11, 2001, and shattered the nation's sense of security from homegrown extremism. McVeigh was a Gulf War veteran who had served in the Army with distinction from 1988 to 1991, earning a Bronze Star for his performance during Operation Desert Storm. However, after failing to qualify for Special Forces selection and leaving the military in 1991, he became increasingly radicalized by anti-government ideology and extremist literature. What drove McVeigh to this devastating attack? McVeigh was obsessed with the 1993 government siege at Waco, Texas, where 76 people, including numerous children, died in a compound fire during a 51-day federal operation against the Branch Davidian religious group. He viewed the government's actions as tyrannical and wanted revenge against what he saw as federal overreach. He chose April 19th because it was the 2-year anniversary of the Waco siege's conclusion. He was heavily influenced by The Turner Diaries, a racist novel by William Pierce depicting a violent overthrow of the government through terrorist attacks. The bombing depicted in the book closely resembled McVeigh's attack method, and pages from the novel were found in the getaway car he had left near the building. He saw himself as a patriot starting a revolution against government tyranny. McVeigh constructed a 7,000-pound bomb using a mixture of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, nitromethane racing fuel, and other components packed into a Ryder rental truck. He had learned bomb-making techniques from military training and extremist manuals. The explosion created a crater 30 feet wide and 8 feet deep, destroying 1/3 of the building. How was he captured so quickly? Just 90 minutes after the bombing, McVeigh was pulled over by Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger for driving without license plates on Interstate 35 near Perry, Oklahoma. During the traffic stop, Hanger noticed a concealed Glock pistol in a shoulder holster, and McVeigh was arrested for weapons charges and taken to the Noble County Jail. While McVeigh sat in jail on the weapons charge, investigators were piecing together evidence from the bombing scene. The truck's rear axle was found 2 blocks away with a vehicle identification number that traced to a Ryder rental in Junction City, Kansas. The rental agent, Eldon Elliott, remembered McVeigh and helped create a sketch that was broadcast nationwide. When investigators ran the name from the rental agreement, they discovered McVeigh was already in custody in Perry for the traffic stop. FBI agents arrived at the Noble County Jail just minutes before his scheduled release on the weapons charge. He was charged with the bombing and transferred to federal custody on April 21st, just 2 days after the attack. What was his trial and execution? McVeigh's trial was moved to Denver due to massive publicity in Oklahoma that made finding an impartial jury impossible. The trial began in April 1997, with prosecutors presenting overwhelming evidence including forensic analysis linking McVeigh to the bomb components, testimony from his accomplice Terry Nichols, and McVeigh's own anti-government statements. He was convicted on 11 federal counts on June 2, 1997, with the jury taking just 23 hours over 4 days to deliberate. The evidence against him included residue from explosives found on his clothing, his rental of the truck used in the bombing, and testimony that he had purchased bomb components. The penalty phase resulted in a death sentence, with jurors citing the massive loss of life and McVeigh's lack of remorse. During this phase, survivors and victims' families testified about the devastating impact of the bombing. He was executed on June 11, 2001, by lethal injection at the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, becoming the first federal prisoner executed since 1963. McVeigh showed no remorse, referring to the deaths as collateral damage and comparing himself to a soldier in war fighting against tyranny. He declined to make a final oral statement, instead submitting a handwritten copy of the poem Invictus, which includes the lines, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." The 168 victims ranged in age from 3 months to 73 years old. The 19 children who died were in the America's Kids Daycare Center on the building's second floor. Over 680 others were injured in the blast, some permanently disabled. The building was demolished in 1995, and a memorial now stands on the site. International terror also struck America in the 1990s. Ramzi Youssef. On February 26, 1993, Ramzi Youssef orchestrated the first World Trade Center bombing, detonating a truck bomb in the underground parking garage that ended 6 lives and injured over 1,000. The attack was intended to topple one tower into the other, which would have caused catastrophic casualties. Youssef was born in 1968 in Kuwait to Pakistani-Palestinian parents and grew up in a middle-class family. He studied engineering in the United Kingdom, where he was radicalized by Islamic fundamentalist ideology. The 1990 Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and subsequent Gulf War intensified his hatred toward the United States. What was his ideology and motivation? Youssef was driven by jihadi ideology and extreme anti-American sentiment, viewing U.S. support for Israel as justification for attacks. He had connections to early al-Qaeda networks and received training in bomb-making at camps in Afghanistan. His technical education gave him sophisticated knowledge of explosives. He entered the United States in September 1992 on a fraudulent Iraqi passport, claiming asylum. He immediately began planning the World Trade Center attack with a group of co-conspirators, building a 200-pound urea nitrate hydrogen gas-enhanced bomb in a rented storage unit. The bomb included cyanide, which Youssef hoped would vaporize and spread through the building's ventilation system, potentially ending thousands. The cyanide burned up in the explosion instead, preventing an even greater catastrophe. How was he eventually captured? Youssef fled to Pakistan hours after the bombing, beginning a 2-year international manhunt. While on the run, he continued planning attacks including Operation Bojinka, a plot to bomb 11 airliners simultaneously over the Pacific Ocean and assassinate Pope John Paul II. In January 1995, a fire in his Manila apartment led to the discovery of his bomb-making operation and a laptop containing details of his plots. Philippine authorities shared this intelligence with U.S. agencies, who realized Youssef was behind both the World Trade Center attack and the airline plot. Youssef was captured on February 7, 1995, at a guest house in Islamabad, Pakistan, following a tip from an informant seeking the $2 million reward. FBI agents flew him back to New York, and as the helicopter passed over Manhattan, they showed him the still-standing Twin Towers. Youssef reportedly stated, "They wouldn't let me land on top." What was his trial outcome? Youssef's trial for the World Trade Center bombing began in August 1997. Evidence included forensic analysis of the bomb components, testimony from co-conspirators, and his own statements to investigators. He defended his actions as legitimate resistance, calling himself a proud terrorist. He was convicted in November 1997 and sentenced to life plus 240 years. At sentencing, Judge Kevin Duffy told him, "You, Ramzi Youssef, came here to wage a war of urban terrorism against innocent Americans. You lost that war." Youssef is currently incarcerated at ADX Florence in Colorado, a supermax prison housing the most dangerous federal inmates. He remains unrepentant about his crimes. His uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, would later mastermind the September 11, 2001 attacks that successfully brought down the Twin Towers. The final case of this era involved a different kind of terror. Ted Kaczynski. Between 1978 and 1995, Ted Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber, mailed or hand-delivered 16 bombs that ended 3 lives and injured 23 others. His 17-year campaign of terror targeted universities, airlines, and technology companies, driven by his anti-technology ideology. Kaczynski was a mathematical prodigy who entered Harvard at age 16 and earned his PhD from the University of Michigan by 25. He became the youngest assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but resigned in 1969 and eventually retreated to a primitive cabin in Montana with no electricity or running water. What transformed this genius into a bomber? Kaczynski's ideology was anarcho-primitivism, believing modern technology was destroying humanity and the environment. He viewed industrialization as an existential threat and decided violence was necessary to wake society up to this danger. His isolation in Montana for 25 years reinforced these beliefs. At Harvard, Kaczynski participated in psychological experiments conducted by Henry Murray that some scholars compare to CIA's MKUltra program. The studies involved harsh interrogations of participants' deeply held beliefs, possibly worsening Kaczynski's paranoia and antisocial tendencies. His bombs were meticulously crafted, growing more sophisticated over time. Early devices were crude, but later bombs showed advanced engineering knowledge. He left false clues at scenes and used untraceable components, making the investigation extremely difficult. How was the Unabomber finally identified? In 1995, Kaczynski demanded that major newspapers publish his 35,000-word manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, threatening more attacks if they refused. The New York Times and Washington Post published it in September 1995, hoping someone would recognize the writing style. David Kaczynski recognized his brother's writing after his wife Linda noticed similarities to letters Ted had sent the family. After agonizing over the decision for months, David contacted the FBI in February 1996, providing old letters and essays for comparison. FBI agents raided Kaczynski's Montana cabin on April 3, 1996, finding bomb components, a live bomb ready to mail, detailed journals documenting all his attacks, and an original copy of the manifesto. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. What was his legal outcome? Kaczynski's trial was set for November 1997, but rather than face trial and possibly be portrayed as mentally ill, he accepted a plea bargain in January 1998. He pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to life without parole plus 30 years to be served at ADX Florence Supermax Prison in Colorado. During proceedings, he remained defiant about his ideology, viewing himself as a revolutionary rather than a criminal. Ted Kaczynski died on June 10, 2023, and his 10 by 12-foot cabin is no longer at the Newseum. It was moved to an FBI storage facility after the physical Newseum in Washington, D.C. closed permanently in 2019. His 3 fatal victims were computer store owner Hugh Scruton, advertising executive Thomas Mosser, and forestry lobbyist Gilbert Murray. The 23 injured included university professors, airline passengers, and technology executives targeted for their association with modern industry. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.